But when you're doing these assessments, it's inevitably going to lead to you testifying in court about your findings, okay? Now, in general, it's not fun. I don't like going to court. It looks cool on TV. One, super boring. You spend most of your time waiting, right? And then two, we have an adversarial legal system. So the person that hired you is going to love your report. Right? They're going to be like, this is great. This is exactly what everybody needs to hear. And they throw you these softball questions, and then you just start explaining things to the jury, and everybody is happy. Because while a lot of people think testimony is like, this is what I think, and everyone should listen. All right? And that's how it works. Like, it's not. Like, the reason they brought you in is because they have a question about something complicated that not everybody understands, but you happen to understand. And that, for me, that's competency, it's risk assessment, it's crisis de-escalation. For somebody else, it could be like elevator maintenance, right? It could be like, they could be an airplane mechanic. Like if this is involving a plane crash, they're gonna have experts come in and explain really complicated stuff to the jury that they need to understand. So most of testimony is actually education. It's like me teaching the jury all these things that they need to know, and then at the end, I'd be like, because of all this, this is my opinion, and then hopefully they go like, oh, okay. That makes sense, right? So when your attorney's questioning you, that's great. That's fun. No problems there. You're just kind of reading the information off your report. But we have an adversarial legal system, so you're going to get questioned by someone who's got a problem with your report, who doesn't like your report, who spent hours looking through everything that you said, trying to find little pieces of information here and there that they can use against you, or places where you think you made a mistake, right? And not only that, but attorneys are trained in logic. They're trained in questioning. This person is not like to be trifled with, and you're having to sit there, answer yes or no questions, thinking like 10 questions ahead, like where are you going with this? What kind of corner are you trying to paint me into right now? Right? And that process, not fun, not enjoyable at all, right? And you need, like, you're going to be attacked. This is real, okay? Like, so, Plaintiff Ramsdell's expert report, dated blah, blah, blah. At the onset, the face of the report demonstrates Ramsdell is unqualified to give expert opinions, and his opinions and report are entirely unreliable. Like, ow, right? Like, I spent a lot of time on that. That hurts, right? Therefore, I had to redact some stuff, right? We object to any consideration of Ramsdell's opinion. These admissions reveal that Ramsdell's methods have not been adequately tested, have not been subject to peer review or publication, and have not been met with general acceptance in the scientific community, which is like the Dauber standard. We don't need to get into that. Ramsdell's, right, unproven assertions, that's what ipse dixit means. Ramsdell's unproven assertions cannot overcome these numerous deficiencies in his findings. And like this gets filed in court, so it's a public document. Now, for the record, like, that's all bullshit. Like, that report was watertight. It was fine. They're just fishing, right? But even when you do a good job, you're going to get attacked, like, frequently. Right? So sometimes this takes pretty thick skin because it's an adversarial system and people are going to act like it's an adversarial system, right? But like the assessment that you give may not be the only reason why you get called to testify, because psychologists have a bunch of other skills and competencies, right? And you have to remember, no one's going to call you as an expert witness unless you're actually an expert. And it takes a lot of time. When I graduated, I did nothing but train in jails, prisons, and maximum security mental hospitals during my doctoral work. I've literally, in my life, never done therapy with a patient that was not incarcerated for some reason, right? Not anyone in the general population. And then I got my doctoral, and I got my doctorate degree. I passed the national licensure exam, and then I started practicing. I did a postdoc, and then about 3-4 years after I became Dr. Ramsdell, I started getting asked to testify, because at that point, like, I knew just enough. I was just enough of an expert to be helpful. Right? So the process of becoming an expert is long, like, is a long-term goal. But you need to be an expert in other stuff, or you can be an expert in other stuff. And so these are just some of the issues that a forensic psychologist could testify about. If it's law enforcement, which is what I do, like the reason that I can testify as an expert in law enforcement is because I train law enforcement. I train Secret Service, FBI, all of Fairfax, all of Arlington, Prince William County Police, right? So because I do this on a regular basis and I'm part of like their police officers' education regimen, when somebody breaks those rules or has a problem with those or somebody claims that somebody broke those rules, I can serve as an expert. But I didn't learn any of that in my doctoral work. I just learned that from years of working with police officers, right? Same thing is true about treating people in correctional settings, about victimization. Lying and deception is usually if a psychologist is testifying about lying or deception, they're just saying it's crap and it doesn't work, because it doesn't work. But there are researchers that do that kind of stuff. Point being, it's not just going to be assessment why you can get called to testify. There's lots of other reasons. In fact, most of the time now when I testify, I'm not evaluating a person. Like, usually I'm evaluating the cops. Right? Like, they arrested this guy, they wound up tasing him 4 times, and he's injured or died as a result, and everybody wants to know, like, did they follow the rules? Was this what they should have done? Is this what a reasonable officer would have done in this situation? So I'm not actually like testing a person. I'm actually looking at the police. Did they do anything that would have elicited a false confession? Like those kinds of questions, right? Now, what I will do sometimes on top of this, on top of testimony, is an attorney will ask me they'll give me another psychologist report and they'll ask me to rip it to shreds, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna cross-examine this guy and I want some help. Can you look at the report and point out like all the little mistakes that this person made or big mistakes that the person made? And initially I was like, no, I don't want to be that guy, right? But now I'm like, hell yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, let me at it, right? And I used to be like, that's not cool, like we're all on the same team thing. But now I don't mind doing it at all. 1, because it's easy, and 2, because it keeps the crap out of court. If attorney doesn't like your answer, they're going to go, and if they got the cash, they're going to hire another psychologist. And they might keep doing that until they get somebody who gives them an answer. And we live in a world where people will do things for money. So sometimes someone will give an answer that they want, right? Or something close to what the attorney wants or they feel like they can use. And when that's the case, like, I'll be happy to help another person tear that report apart, right? In fact, when I do a report, like, I finish everything a week early, which is, just so you know, like, not my style, right? But I have to, right? Because when I finish a report, one of the things I do is I pay 2 other psychologists to look at my report. And I give it to them. I'm like, here you go, tear it to shreds. And they'll usually be like, okay, well, like 1, typos, but 2, like, oh, you're trying to make this point, but it doesn't really work or whatever, and they give me good feedback, and then I incorporate that into my final report, and then I give that to the attorney. So if the attorney wants to give my report to another psychologist, go ahead, right? I already had 2 people look at it and try and tear it apart. I'm not saying anything that shouldn't be said. I'm not going to let the attorney push my opinion places where it shouldn't be pushed, or I try not to let that happen. Right? So if I'm willing to subject myself to that process, then I feel like everybody else should too, and I will gladly consult with an attorney and help them with other psychologists' stuff. Right? Now, regardless of what kind of assessment you're doing or why you get asked to testify, it's not pleasant. Right? And so, like, one of the things that I tell people all the time is, like, 2 things have to happen before I get called. The first thing is somebody has to be dead. Right? And if they're not dead, they're traumatized or they're severely injured, right? Or their constitutional rights were violated in some horrible way. So that's first. And then second thing is everyone's arguing about it. Because if something horrible happened and everyone's like, this was tragic, and this shouldn't have happened, and everyone agrees that it shouldn't have happened, that's going to get settled out of court. Like, that's not going to trial. They're not arguing about that, right? It's only when something horrible has happened and then everyone's arguing about it that a forensic psychologist is going to get called. So all of the cases involve some form of tragedy. And it's not necessarily like super fun work, right? It's rewarding. Like sometimes I'm on the side of police, sometimes I'm on the side of citizens, right? Like I'm just finishing a case now where like this guy was arrested, he had a severe mental illness. It could only be described as like a group beat down, his arrest. Like they beat the crap out of him, they tased him twice, and then he had a cardiac event after the second tasing and died. And so in that case, I'm fine being like, that's messed up. And here's all the policies and procedures, and here's what a reasonable officer would have done, and that's not what they did. But I also just finished another case in Arlington, which is rare for me to do in DC, where the officers did everything right. Like it's exactly what they should have done, and the person was just ridiculous in suing them. And in that case, I'd be like, you guys relax, you did everything right. Like you're not gonna get punished for this. And then testify and be like, that's what they should have done, right? So that part of it is really rewarding. The stressful part is there's some serious consequences, like it's whether or not someone's going to jail for the next 20 years, right? Or there may be $3 million on the line that somebody has to pay. Like the consequences of these evaluations can be very high. And I'm not the sole decider, right? That's the jury, but the role in it is stressful, absolutely. And then despite body cams and things like that, like you never have all the information that you need, right? It's imperfect. And so you have to make decisions, binary decisions, yes or no. Psychologists love to be in the gray area, like, oh, everything is dynamic and we're gonna like, it's all on a sliding scale. Like, but in court, they'll be like, are you guilty or not guilty? Like, it's a world of binary decisions. And so you have to make binary decisions with incomplete information, and not everyone is entirely comfortable doing that. And it can be really stressful. On top of the fact that it's all traumatic, right? Which we'll talk about in a second. Now, the last thing, right, is that because forensic psychologists are used to making binary decisions with incomplete information, and we are technically like experts in human behavior, right? Then we get asked to do a lot of other stuff. So I train law enforcement, but I've worked with corporations. Like we help develop software for a corporation that monitors all the employees' communications. This is gonna sound horrible. Just literally, if you work for a company, they own your email, right? Just know that. Like, they can have a bot or a person read any of your emails at any time. That's not private. That's their email account that they gave you. They own it, right? And also that's true of messages, like any Slack or any message system that you use, any corporate phone. All of that stuff can be monitored, right? When your iPhone, do you remember like a couple years ago when your iPhone started transcribing your voicemails, right? So you could read them instead of, right? They didn't do that because you deserve it, right? They did that because when they transcribe the emails, then the bots can read them, right? And then they can use that information. Like, that's why. Like, it's a handy feature, but you give up that privacy to get the feature. And so we developed, like, obviously if you're a big investment bank or Exxon or somebody, you're interested in finding out like who's leaking secrets to the media, who's trying to steal our super secret formula for Coca-Cola, like whatever it might be, who's engaging in corporate espionage. And so we help them develop a set of software that reads emails and DMs and all of the information in their systems and helps identify those actors. Now people are involved, but it's super interesting project and not anything outside of what Google does to everything that you upload or send, right? There's a bunch of psychologists who do stuff with military and special ops. In fact, a friend of mine does a lot of consulting with defense intelligence. The most special forces units, it's a chimney kind of management style, and they have a psychologist embedded with them. And usually those psychologists are like former military or former forensic psychologists. There's also like, I was hanging out with some people from FBI and Secret Service at the BAU. So there are like gun-toting psychologists. My friend Melissa is one of them. She works in BAU 3, which is Crimes Against Children. And we went to the same school and she's a total badass. But she does investigations and she does profiling and she carries a gun. She's a psychologist and was trained as a forensic, like clinical is her degree, still clinical psych. Been trained in forensic environments. And the same is true of people at Secret Service who protect the president or part of Protective Intelligence Division and all of that stuff, right? Now,